Welcome to the second video in this series where I'm building an automation with Automation Anywhere. And the particular one I'm building is from our developer challenges, this particular one here, which is a HR data migration challenge where we need to take data from a Windows app and a REST API, combine that and enter it into our web form here. If you haven't seen the first video, I would suggest starting there. In the first video, we built our parent bot, which is going to be responsible for doing the looping 10 times according to the challenge. We built the logic to extract data from the Windows app. And in this video, we're going to fetch the data from the REST API and key the data into the web form. So let's get started. So let's take a look at the REST endpoint that we actually need to call to fetch our information. I'm going to take this information here, the URL, paste that into a new tab, and just replace the employee ID with a parameter to give this a test. And you can see there's what we should be expecting to be returned to us. Some JSON with the phone number and the start date embedded in it. So let's come back to our automation logic. And the first thing I need to add is a REST action. Now the REST action has a number of different options here. I know it's going to be a get. It doesn't actually say anything here from the instructions, but the fact that I can put that straight into the browser and get a result means that it's bound to be a get call rather than a post. And I'm going to parameterize our employee ID in the URL here as we loop through. So I select the existing parameter that I had created. Now what's returned, our JSON, well, it's actually going to be the JSON and a number of other things in a dictionary. I like to use the dictionary option here, and notice that the body will be in the body key of the dictionary. So let's create a new dictionary object, and I'll select that, and I'll just need to fetch the body parameter to get the actual JSON out of that dictionary object. So the next thing I want to do is add in my ability to work with the JSON content. Now there's a JSON package, and it works by starting the session, which holds the actual JSON object in there, and then you would naturally end the session once you're done. At the start, you can feed in a file that might contain the JSON. In my case, I have that in a variable here, so let's feed it in as text. So it's going to be my dictionary object. And as we mentioned before, I want to fetch the body key that will contain the JSON document that you saw before. So the next actions I need to add in are a couple to fetch the actual values that we saw there. So that is the get node value. So if you recall, I need to fetch the phone number and the start date. So let's just copy that across to here. And I'll store that into a variable so I can use it in my data entry component. And let's make one more copy of that action there. And we'll then assign that also to a variable. And now we've completed all of the logic for fetching data from our two source applications, our REST endpoint and our Windows application. Now, normally I would keep logic for different applications in different bot files, but for this demonstration, let's just combine them together into our one parent bot file here. What we do have created now is all of our variables to hold the record data that we want to enter into our web form. And at this point, I'm going to create a child application to do that task. Now, normally you wouldn't name these parent and child. You would name them after the actual process that you're automating so that it makes sense what they are called here in the control room. But for the demonstration, once again, we'll just call this parent and child bot logic. The first thing we need to add into our child bot here is the variables that are going to be passed in from our calling parent. And we do that by coming into the variables area here and defining each of these. So the first one that we created in video 1 was the employee ID. So it doesn't matter if you name these the same thing or not. What is important is you must flag it as an input variable so that it can be used as an input from the calling bot. So I'm going to create each of those to match the variables that we pass across. So our first name would be the next one. And just as we did in video 1, rather than bore you with creating each of these, I'll jump ahead to where we've created the rest of them in the video. Okay, so now we've created all of our variables and I've deleted those 2 sample variables that were there as well. The next thing I want to do is create one more variable which I'm going to use for error trapping. This one is going to return a value back to our parent bot to indicate whether each data entry task was successful or was a failure. So I flag it as an output. I'll give it a default value of success and we'll use some error trapping to indicate whether an error occurs, and in which case I'll change it to fail or something like that. So let's head back to our parent bot logic and we'll set up the call to the child bot and pass the parameters across. So the action that we need to use within our parent bot here is the run task bot action. And once we drag that across, we can then select the child bot that we want to run. And I'm going to browse here to select it. And notice as we make that selection, it populates all of the variables here that we need to pass into that child bot. So each one of these, I just need to map it to the variable that's holding the value here in my parent bot. Now, just as before, rather than bore you with setting up each of these because it's just the same thing over and over, I'll jump ahead to the point where I've actually mapped all of these across. So now that we've mapped all of our variables, and you can see here I've been a little bit casual in setting up these variable names here. So manager with a lowercase, manager with an uppercase, last name, surname. That's not very good practice. What I'd recommend you do is name these according to a particular standard and always use that standard throughout your bot logic. So this is a good example there of what not to do. The final configuration I need is to map our output variable to a variable in our parent here so we know what to do if any of the data entry tasks fail. So let's go back to our child bot and we can start working on the logic there. So the first thing I want to add to my bot logic is an error handler block. Now what that lets me do is fall over to a specific set of actions anytime a problem occurs in my bot logic. So in this case, I'm going to add an action to assign the value of error to my return code, which is sent back to my parent logic. So I will know if anything failed while doing the data entry. Now in the main part of the block, I can use my recorder to record the steps that I want to perform when doing the data entry into my web form. So just as we did in the first video, I'm going to interact with each of the controls on the web page. That identifies their properties using the recorder, and using those properties we can then automate them when it's time to run the bot logic. So this will generate the steps in my automation logic, and all I'll need to do is edit each of them to set the required parameters. So now we can stop the recorder, and as we come back to automation anyway, you can see it's generated all of the steps of our automation. So now we just need to edit each of these actions and change the placeholder text that I used to be the correct variable that is holding the value passed by our parent automation. Note that when you do come down to items like drop downs, it will actually have a click action recorded there, and you might need to change that action to be select item by text. And as long as the variable value is a value in our drop down list, then it will be able to make that selection automatically. So once again, let's jump ahead to the point in the video where I've completed all of these actions, and we should then be ready to run our automation logic. Now those with sharp eyes might have noticed that I didn't put in a command or an action to close the browser each time I go through the loop. The reason for that is that I actually want to keep these open so I can see what sort of score I'm getting as the automation is going through and performing each one of these data entry tasks. And you can see very briefly there, this is the automation running in real-time speed, that it is popping up with a red message saying that one of the fields has been missed, and we do get a score there saying how many out of 11 have been correctly filled. It seems to be filling in all of the fields, so I'll have to do a bit of debugging to find out exactly what's going on. Let's again jump ahead to the end of this process until our bot has completed and we can look at the results. So you can see our automation has completed successfully. If we take a look at one of the web forms here, you can see we have correctly submitted 9 out of 11 fields, and I suspect that's the same for each of these particular items. Yes. So in the next video, what we'll do is dive into some debugging and talk about how to make the automation more bulletproof, more enterprise. So thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one.